there you go. Almost 20 hours, or maybe a little more than 20 hours of interviews with my 6 siblings and me. I hope that all of that information is of some interest to you and other family members, whoever might be watching. But you know what? Even if it isn't, I don't care. I just have had an absolute blast doing this project, and I've learned a lot. Even though I thought I knew a lot about my family history, I learned a lot of things I did not know from my 6 siblings. Well, the other thing I wanted to mention here is in terms of next steps. I've had a woman, Sid Branca, that's been really, really helpful. I hired her to put all this together, and she's done an enormous amount of splicing and editing and voiceover and so on. I just want to thank her. Because there are some other things that we've talked about doing. One would be to take, well, I should back up a little bit. After my siblings have looked at their own interviews, there may be some additional things that come to mind, some things they wish that they would have included but they forgot, or maybe even something they said inaccurately that they want to correct, or just do an update to the present. Some of these are already 3 or 4 years old. But in addition to that, Sid and I have talked about the possibility of taking certain questions, such as what do you remember about your grandparents, and combining all of our answers, all 7 answers, into sort of a single package that might run 10 or 15 minutes or whatever, just so that everyone can have that all together in one place and get the different recollections and maybe some differences in how our grandparents were viewed by different siblings. We've also talked, Sid and I, about the possibility of creating a family website in which we could post not only these oral histories, but also other things that might be floating around out there, such as old letters or memorabilia of different types that we could post and make it available to on the website to family and friends. But anyway, this is all speculative and no guarantees on any of it, but just some things that we've talked about that I wanted to share, and stay tuned. When I put the sort of final wrappings on all 7 interviews and talked about next steps, I mentioned that one of the next steps might be each of us 7 siblings going back and listening to our interviews and seeing if it triggered any need for corrections or updating or whatever. So let me do that. Let me be the one that leads off with that. It's been a little over 2 years since Wendy did the interview. It's now February 17th, 2020. And there are 3 or 4 things that I would like to mention. The first thing is Carolyn shared with me the exact date in which Mother moved her home from the ranch into New Underwood. That happened to be November 4th, 1980. Oh, exactly, almost exactly 40 years ago. Another piece of information I sort of stumbled upon was I was doing a little research on the 1611 Davenport Street house in Sturgis, and I was astounded to note the square footage on that. 1,942 square feet, which by today's standard is not a huge house by any means. And at the time, though, this all shows what the importance of one's point of reference. When my point of reference was that tiny little ranch house out at Elm Springs, the house in Sturgis seemed like I remember it so well. I thought it was an absolute monstrosity, a veritable castle. And it did have a lot of rooms, but the rooms were fairly small. I think it had probably 9 rooms. Well, here where Trish and I live in Chicago, our apartment has 6 rooms, including the kitchen, only 3 bedrooms. The house in Sturgis, as best as I recall, had at least 5 bedrooms, but we have 2,700 square feet here, almost 1,000 more than the house in Sturgis. So I thought that was of interest. I also wanted to make a couple of corrections. One, I mentioned that I went back to the University of Wyoming after teaching school at Elm Springs, the Lynn School, in 1962. That should have been 1963, no big deal. Something that is a big deal is I mentioned that I got married on December 21, but I mentioned that was to Suzanne. Well, wrong. That was when Patricia and I got married. I also said that when I was at the University of Wyoming, I had a lot of employment opportunities that came my way that I rejected. I should have said, well, I was at the University of Nebraska, and the reason that that I had rejected all of those that came along was because I was so happy at the University of Nebraska. But then when Purdue University came calling, and that being only 90 miles from where Tricia's parents were living, and they were in need of our help, and both mom and dad were no longer with us, that was the main reason that I finally made an exception and checked out the employment opportunity at Purdue. But as it turned out, as I mentioned, I think earlier in the interview, that was a great career choice for me. The other thing that I didn't cover adequately in my original interview were the kids. I mean, I talked a lot about the kids in terms of the fun things that we did when we were growing up and how much I enjoyed being a father and that kind of thing. But I didn't bring everyone up to date in terms of what everyone is doing now. So let me just go through, beginning with Kelly, the oldest. Kelly graduated from Penn State, I believe it was 1992, and went to the University of Montana in Missoula to get his master's degree. And while in Missoula, he became enamored, more than enamored, with mountaineering and mountain climbing, ice climbing, rock climbing, that kind of thing. And that became not just his recreation, but also his vocation. And now he works full-time for Patagonia out of his cabin in Estes Park, Colorado. Jill also graduated from Penn State University the same year, and she had a successful career in broadcast journalism for a good number of years. But then about 10 years ago, she put her career to the side and decided her new career would be being a mother, and to the best of my knowledge, that's all she does, and she doesn't have any career outside of the home going on at the moment. She and her family live in the Los Angeles area. Carter moved to Nebraska with Tricia and I in 1989, and he's lived there ever since. Carter has had a number of struggles and challenges over the years. It seems like the only luck he has is bad luck in some ways, but he's amazing in terms of how resilient he is, and he just keeps on going and bounces back. One of his biggest biggest tragedy in our family, and that really took a toll on Carter, was about 2 years ago, maybe 3. His oldest daughter, Chanel, Arctic granddaughter, was killed in a car accident. Carter lives and works in Omaha, and when I say works, that's really about all he does, because he struggles to have to make ends meet. Works one full-time job and another one almost full-time, but that is to support Sienna, who's his 12-year-old daughter. I think she's 12. And then after Chanel was killed in the car accident, she had a young son named Jason, and Carter, bless his heart, has taken on Jason, his grandson, and is doing a great job. Carter's always been a great father, great loving father, raising Jason. And then Carter also has Dietrich, who's now in his early 20s. Tanya also spent a number of years in Nebraska, but a few years back, I don't know, 5 or 6 maybe, she moved to Texas. She and her husband, Jermaine, an outskirts of Dallas, Plano, Texas, to be specific. And Tanya's employed and Jermaine's employed, and Sydney, they have an empty nest now. Sydney, their oldest daughter, our grandchild, is going to college and almost finished at Prairie View A&M. And Jamal, who's Tanya's oldest, and actually our oldest grandchild, has moved back and forth between Texas and Nebraska, and currently is back in Nebraska. Tanya received her undergraduate degree from the University of Nebraska in Omaha and has a master's degree from Bellevue University, also in Omaha. Then Danya, who I mentioned how she came into our family in my interview with Wendy, she now lives in Guadalajara, has worked her way up to a very high level position with Walmart Mexico, comes to the U.S., to Bentonville, Arkansas, corporate headquarters, fairly often, and oftentimes we see her when she's up on one of those corporate retreats or conferences or whatever. And I'm excited to report that in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, I'll be rendezvousing with Danya in Dallas, Texas, to go to the American Rodeo. So I think that brings us up to speed on all the children. I love them all, always have, and always will, and that takes care of that piece. Well, another family member that I didn't introduce you to, you did meet Mary Elizabeth Princess Priscilla Sunshine Cordes, because she was in and out of the framing on a couple of occasions, but you also need to meet Dewey Lopez Obama, and he happens to own Trish, and he doesn't have too much use for me, as you can see, so there he goes. Now, the final piece of this is kind of an update from the 2 years roughly since Wendy did my initial interview, and there's several things that I would like to cover by way of updates. One of the most significant is a little over a year or more ago, Carter came to Trish and says, "Would you adopt me?" Trish immediately said, "Of course," but it caught her by surprise, of course. But that was significant. It's interesting because Carter, right from the get-go, when Trish and I married, he never had any issue with Trish in terms of acceptance, and he never saw it as something that was competitive or that he had to make a choice between her and Suzanne. It's like, hey, I can love them both. Now, that is pretty obvious that should be the way it is, but I'm telling you, it's somewhat rare, and we give credit to Carter for having the emotional maturity and sophistication to look at those relationships that way, and we're really delighted that he decided he wanted to make the special relationship that he had with Trish official. Secondly, my bucket list. One of the items on my bucket list for some time has been that I wanted to go to all 50 states and all 7 continents, and I took care of all 50 states a long time ago. The last state being Alaska, when Jill invited me up to be on one of her TV programs. But the 7 continents still eludes me, although a little over a year ago, I guess it was, I did spend 2 weeks in India, so I can now check off Asia. I still have Antarctica to go, and if anybody wants to go to Antarctica with me, give me a call. I would be interested in exploring that possibility. On the downside, there's been a couple of, before getting to that, I want to also mention something that's consuming and has consumed for at least the last year an enormous amount of my time, but I'm really, really excited about it. And that is volunteering to provide leadership along with another former classmate of mine on the rodeo team and program at South Dakota State University, my alma mater. I've invested and volunteered tons and tons and tons of time on that, and it's a way for me to give back, pay it forward, pay it back, however you want to think about that. Something that I've always thought was really important to do. And it's not about rodeo, really, because if this whole project comes together the way that we hope, and it's going to take several years for it to happen, we will have a larger array of scholarships available, and I'm hoping, or if that happens, we would have people going to college that would not otherwise be going to college, and that would include some Native American students from the great state of South Dakota and elsewhere. So I'm really excited about that project, and our goal is to make South Dakota State University have a nationally recognized top 5 rodeo program, one that is renowned throughout the country. Now, a couple of sadder notes. One, I've had two deaths that have impacted me to a considerable degree. One was about a year and a half ago when Mrs. Dudley died. Now, who is Mrs. Dudley? Mrs. Dudley was Tanya's foster parent living in Pittsburgh. And in this case, we were able to keep in close connection with Mrs. Dudley, and that relationship with Mrs. Dudley just continued to grow over time. And she was so important because she was just an absolutely remarkable woman. She lived in a very low income situation, and she and her husband Willie were faced all kinds of discrimination throughout their life, especially growing up in Birmingham, Alabama. But they moved to Pittsburgh, and Mrs. Dudley became a foster parent for God knows how many dozens, hundreds of children. And she was just magical in the way that she could relate and bring the very best out of all children. And Tanya came to Mrs. Dudley with some issues, and Mrs. Dudley, bless her heart, just took Tanya into her loving heart and home. And by the time Tanya came into our life, she was quite a self-assured, confident young girl of, I don't know, 3 or 4 or whatever. And Mrs. Dudley deserves so much credit for all of the hundreds of lives that she touched over the years. When she died, I went to the funeral in Pittsburgh and was able to reconnect with her 3 sons who I'd met on other occasions. But Mrs. Dudley, despite all the racial discrimination, and as brutal as that was, and she also had a handicap, overcame all of that. I remember when Trish and I stopped to see her, I guess it would have been 2008, on our way to President Obama's first inauguration. We said something, I said something about when you were growing up in the ugly racist city of Birmingham, Alabama in the 1930s, could you ever imagine the president of our country that was African American? And she just shook her head and said, no way, no way. And anyway, a great woman that lived a wonderful life, and I miss her. Much more recently, Terry, a dear friend, Trish's best friend from long before the time I met Trish, died less than 10 days ago. It's still hard to think about it and talk about it. As it turns out, and this was mentioned in my interview with Wendy, Terry and Trish were together when I first met Trish. And so when Trish and I got married, it's sort of like marrying Trish and Terry, because she was such an integral part of our relationship and remained that way, and it even deepened. And I developed my own separate and special relationship with Terry, and I loved her dearly. She would come visit us wherever we happened to be living. We would visit her in Columbus, Ohio. She went with us to Cuba, to Las Vegas, and all. She was just a critical part of our lives. And in October, at age 68, she suffered a stroke. It was a serious stroke, but not life-threatening. And she was starting to recover, relatively nicely from that. And then on February, I don't know, or into January, she suffered just an absolutely catastrophic stroke. And over these last 4 months, we've spent an enormous amount of time in her hometown of Columbus, Ohio, taking care of her. Teresa's probably spent more time there than she has here in Chicago, and was with her, holding her hand when she took her last breath. But that's we're still processing that, and we'll never completely get over that loss, but we'll learn to live with it, and we'll bask in all the memories that we had with Terry, because they were special and precious. We have, as I think about this, we have our official families by either biology or legalities, and then we have our family of choice, and Terry and Tanya are part of that family of choice, and they can be just absolutely as important, and in some cases more important than the official family. So anyway, it's hard for me to talk about the loss of both people, but Terry in particular. So I will leave you with the idea that hug someone today, because life is precious.